All right, hi everyone. Welcome to IVED 2023 Judge Test Briefing. So we will discuss about the answers for true and false questions and also short answers. There will be me and also Kevin talking here, and a bit disclaimer. So we will also display some statistics, especially from the true and false section. However, because there are around 4 judges that did not submit the judge tests, they will still be included in the true or false statistics, however. And yeah, probably just a quick reminder for everyone. So yeah, next. Okay, first we will discuss the true or false section. So a little bit of statistics. We will divide this from independent judges and N2s, and second of all, the invited judges. So the score range for independent judges are first 8 to 10, second to 4 to 7, and last, the smallest, is 0 to 3. And those who got 0 to 3 in their true and false questions are around 10% of overall judges in in-depth and also N2s. So yeah, in this section, we also include those who did not submit the judge test because technically they will be counted to 0. Their score is 0. So yeah, that is what the previous disclaimer was about. Second, the range between 4 to 7, there are around 30% amongst all in-depth and also N2s. And lastly, the majority are those who have 8 to 10 scores. Congratulations, like very impressive. And second, in invited judges, most invited judges have the 8 to 10 score range, which acquires around 93% of total invited. And the smallest range or the smallest score are between 4 to 7, which only comprise around 6.7% of total invited. So yeah, very good, guys. Impressive. Next. We also include the common mistakes in this true or false sections. So we compile around out of like 10 questions, which question that most people answer incorrectly. So maybe this can be used for everyone, that these are the trickiest questions compared to all. And those are question number 3, number 5, and also number 10, because accumulatively most people are answered like incorrectly in these questions, and we will discuss about that later on in the next section. Okay. Next, let's discuss the true or false questions one by one. First question, trainee judge is allowed to vote. The answer is false. So trainee judges are not allowed to vote or like submit, or like their decisions basically are not included in the ballot. So only chairs and panels are allowed to vote, and only their decisions will be included in the ballots. However, trainees will still have to provide an OA to the debaters and explain the reasonings, the decisions, and more. So they will still be scored irrespective of whether or not the decision determine the result of the debate. Next question. Duration of an OA affects its quality. This is false. So the quality of OA is determined by a number of reasons, but duration isn't one of them. It is determined by whether or not the OA is easy to follow overall. Is the OA jumpy? Is the comparison made by the judge holistic? Did the judge credit both teams fairly, or whether the judge actually like oversimplifies certain contributions from the team? So those are the aspects on how we determine the quality of an OA. And this is also a good note for the judges. So how long or how short your OA is not detrimental of its quality. It also doesn't determine the score that you might acquire from your OA. So yeah, be more focused on the quality instead of like the duration. Next. This is a bit tricky questions. A number of structural reasons in an argument determines its level of persuasiveness, with 38% people answered true and 61% people's of total judges answered false. So the correct answer is false. This is wrong because judges should assess arguments persuasiveness based on the quality of the reasons, not the quantity. Like, for example, an argument made out of like only two structural reasons, but each of them are like very compelling, can have or like can give greater contributions in comparison to an argument made out of like 5 or 6 structural reasons, but all of them are like one-liner, or maybe all of them are irrelevant with the assertion made by the speakers, for example. So yeah, number of structural reasons does not determine the level of persuasiveness of an argument. So judge should assess arguments persuasiveness based on the content or like the quality of each reasons provided. So the number alone doesn't determine the level of persuasiveness. Next. Question number 4, the opposition team is obliged to bring counter proposal. This is false. So this is a very classic question. However, this is not always the case, right? In some debates, opposition team only needs to simply weigh the benefits and harms, like, for example, in this house believes that X brings more harm than good, or maybe in this house regrets motion. So for judges, be more careful and in assessing opposition team's contribution. So just because they don't provide counter proposal doesn't automatically mean they deserve to be penalized or they deserve a lesser score compared to the government, or that also doesn't mean that their contribution matters less, because you also need to assess like what the motion expects, what is the direction of the debate and such. So yeah, you should not put a standard on the opposition team to always bring counter proposals, because it's not always obligatory. Next. Question number 5. So a third speaker is allowed to bring new lines of rebuttal to arguments made by their opponent. With almost 25% of total judges answered false and 75% answered true. So this is also one of the tricky questions, I suppose, based on the previous statistics. So the answer is actually true. So third negative is only prohibited from bringing new lines of arguments or new lines of substantive materials, but it's allowed to bring new lines of responses to the argument made by their government whip, for example, and it will be counted as rebuttals, not case. So the for the judge test, I mean, like for this particular question, I think we need to be more careful in like looking at the wordings, because the question specifically said new lines of rebuttals, right? Not new lines of for example, new lines of contributions like substantive speech or whatnot. So yeah, maybe pay attention to that. But this also means judges later on should be more careful in assessing which contribution counts as new matter or new substantive, or does it actually counted as like a new rebuttal, and which, if it's a new rebuttal, it's you also need to trace back like which point did it respond to, right? Because if a speaker or maybe an opposition we've made a certain new line of rebuttal, like judges, if you're not like careful enough, you can dismiss that as a new matter, but you also need to listen back or like check on your notes on the government whip's contributions or the DPM's contributions, for example, to ensure or just to make sure if it's a new matter or it's actually a rebuttal, a valid rebuttal made to specific points in the government whip. So yeah, that's on the question 5. Next. Question 6, duration of speech determines the speaker's score. This is false. So just because someone doesn't give a full 7-minute speech does not mean the quality of their speech or the quality of their entire contribution is less than a speaker who give a full one. Sorry, it should be an 8-minute speech. Yeah, there's a typo there, because Australia's is like 8 minutes, right? So yeah, anyway, adjudicators need to be thorough in listening to speakers' content and also taking their notes on their contents, irrespective of the duration of speech. So a speaker may give a speech of like 5 or 6 minutes, but the content of its speech probably can be like much better or like much more persuasive in comparison to a speaker that give a full 8-minute speech. So yeah, don't only pay attention to the duration of the speech. Okay, next. The only adjudicator that is obliged to provide an OA as the chair. This is false. In IVED, all judges, be it chair, panels, or even trainees, are required to give an oral adjudication to the debaters, and these debaters will be the one who give you score as well. So yeah, all judges will have to provide an OA. Next. Okay, question number 8. If a definition proposed by affirmative team is challenged by their opponent, then the adjudicator should automatically judge the debate based on the negative team's proposed definition. This is false. So just because a definition is challenged doesn't mean it's automatically wrong, right? Judge should also weigh the efforts and also the response, for example, made by both teams to prove why their definition is most correct and which one is more relevant to the debate. So yeah, just because a definition is challenged doesn't mean the challenge in itself automatically stands, right? There should be a further and more holistic assessment to that. Next. Question number 9. When the team provides two contradicting claims, the adjudicator should only value the latter claim. This is false. So judges should, first of all, weigh how the second claim actually compromised the persuasiveness of the first claim. And just should then consider if the second claim actually fully destroys the first one. Like, if yes, then the judges should count and only value the first claim made by the debater. So first of all, you should assess like whether or not the second claim fully destroyed the first one, or it just partially make the first one less persuasive. And then you can continue to conclude whether or not the second claim actually relevant, or whether or not you should count the second claim. Because if the second claim actually considered to be fully destroying the first claim, then you should only take the first claim as the the most valid claim and just dismiss the second one. Next. Okay, last question. Also quite tricky, looking at the previous statistics. So the question number 10 reads, affirmative team can fiat that their policy will get popular support and that there will be no attempt to reverse it. This is false because it's not a fiat in proposition that their proposal will automatically get supportive support from the public, or like getting full acceptance by the public, and that there will be no attempt to cancel or like try to reverse it. The only fiat that affirmative team can have is that the policy will be implemented. The policy will be voted by the the imaginary council or the imaginary parliament that we're talking about. So, but it cannot, they cannot fiat that the policy will be long lasting, for example, that the people will fully accept that, because whether or not the policy will sustain, it will be up to the debate, whether or not the policy will create the intended outcome or the intended benefit. It is what the debate's supposed to talk about, right? So they cannot fiat that the people, or maybe like the society as a whole, will not protest about it, or will not do some attempt to actually reverse or cancel the policy, for example. Yeah, so that's all for the true or false question. Next, we're going to move to short answers led by Kevin.
Okay, thank you so much, Sekar, for that very clear explanations about the true and false questions of the IVED representative judge test. So in my part, we're going to do it simply. We're going to try to dissect the 5 short answer questions that I've given to you, and you can just check how it weighs to the answers that you sent during when you were answering the judge test yourself. So let's just go straight into it. So the first question is the most classic question, I think, in all of judge tests, which is usually also the first question in most judge tests, I think. It's about what does it mean to be an average reasonable voter, and how do you credit an argument as an average reasonable voter? I think that to answer this question, you could have just seen it from the manual that was sent. Basically, there's a lot of different things that are put there. You don't have any biases for or against the motion. So if this house will ban smoking is being debated, and you are a smoker, you're not allowed to like appreciate the argument for those who support smoking just because you're a smoker and all those kind of stuff, or that because you have a certain political leaning, more be a left or a right political leaning, you shouldn't have any bias, let those biases disturb you when you are adjudicating the debate. You have to always judge the arguments, which team creates the better arguments and all those kinds of things. Second, you do not utilize any personal knowledge in judging. I'll explain it when we get to the final part on down. Third, you have a general level of knowledge based on a decent intellect and an active international news consumption. This means that as a speaker or as a judge, you are supposed to know things that are, very general, and it's something that most people would know on our current day and age. And also as a debater, maybe you can see from the down, from the one that's below, you have a general knowledge of the world. You know that Indonesia's president is Jokowi. You know that US president currently is Joe Biden. You know that Donald Trump used to become the president for the US before Joe Biden. You know that formerly maybe it was Prabowo versus Jokowi in 2019. So those are the general knowledge that you're supposed to know, and you have an active international news consumption. And then just adding it up to oversimplify, you do not know about specific topics that may be niche knowledge. You don't know what's happening between Joe Biden's home life, between him and his wife, for example, the current specific actions the quadrilateral alliance in Asia has taken in the past 3 days. Very specific knowledge, like those are not allowed to be uh, your tipping points. You're not allowed to insert those kinds of knowledge that you know about, but maybe it isn't brought into the debate as a way for you to judge or as a metric, because that's stepping in and that's very unfair. Four, you do not credit logical fallacies and you give limited credit to appeal to authority and emotion, because as you know, in our stalls we very much credit style. So we still give credit if they are able to appeal to your emotion, but do not take it too much. Do not take that too much that it overwhelms your other levels of weighing. Fifth, you have no geographical or cultural biases for the purposes of assessing the debate. For us, we may be Indonesians, but don't let our bias as Indonesians disturb us when we're judging. And lastly, you accept a wide range of style and arguments as being potentially persuasive. So like, yeah, there's a lot of ways where people speak. It may be their accent, it may be the way that their institutions told them to speak. Do not dismiss them just because they have a different style as yours. Try to credit the logics and their attempt to explain their case. So that's what an average reasonable voter is. TLDR, you can see down there what is the basic gist as an average reasonable voter. Okay. So the second question is a kind of scenario question. You are judging a debate with the motion this House believes that social movement should use anger in their advocacy. Affirmative or government argues that it's justified because they've been historically oppressed, that the agency has been stripped away, and here's one way for them to achieve catharsis. Optai to respond to this by stating that there are other alternatives, such as negotiations and using the voting blocks in the country. So how would you weigh this exchange? So personally, from as the CAP, we think that in this level of exchange, it's still won by affirmative over negative, because we understand that negative brought a very potential argument in regards to how there are alternatives and whatnot. But the problem with this is twofold. Number one, their attempt to point out alternative doesn't specifically answer what's being thrown away by government, because government's point is that when you are historically oppressed and you are using anger, it allows you to have catharsis, which has never been rebutted by opposition, right? They never really explain why specifically using anger in and of itself is something that is not allowed as a weapon of advocacy. What are the impacts and why are these alternatives better than the usage of anger, like what government side? And I think that even if we were to weigh on process or likelihood, I think that op was very assertive. Even if you were to buy their benefit in regards to how, if you were willing to buy their attempt to explain how there are like other alternatives, they need to explain as to how that alternative is able to reach their benefit in regards to achieve equality. At least on government, they took a smaller burden in catharsis, and given that they frame the importance of catharsis due to the historical oppression which has been stripped away, it means that affirmative, at least in this exchange, wins over negative on the responses. So it's on the importance of responses and on the likelihood of burden that you can take. Those are two tipping points that you can take to assess this kind of exchange. So third, I think that this one's a quite tricky question because this is like what Sekat was talking about in regards to fiat, which is to say that you are currently judging a debate with the motion this House will ban zoos. Affirmative or government sets up that they would only ban zoos that keep endangered animal as their proposal, while opposition argues that fully banning zoos in the country will not be feasible because you need more budget to retrain the animal and reallocating them in accordance to their habitat. So given the context of this debate, I think that this is a quite open-ended question for you to answer. We'll assess it on how you weigh the points. But I think there are two important things for us to note in this question. Number one is that affirmative gave an unfair limitation in the debate because they are very nitpicky about what kind of zoos that they're trying to pick, right, about endangered animals. But then, like, back again, as an reasonable voter, like, what differs in endangered animal zoos with other types of zoos? I think that's still unclear on government. So it limits the scope and it kind of makes the scope and limitation of the debate kind of blurry. So it makes it kind of confusing as a setup for the debate. However, on side of opposition, you could argue that the response is very unstrategic since they challenge the government's right of fiat. I think back on the true and false part, Sekat has explained that for fiat, what fiat means is that you are able to assume that the policy will be implemented later on. So you can see that on the wording of the motion in of itself, it says that it is not feasible because you need more budget. They're saying that you're unable to implement this policy. When we have to assume that they're able to implement that policy, we have to assume that the capital is enough for having the ability for us to ban the usage of endangered animal zoos if we were to follow on affirmative's proposals. The question of capital isn't all that much to say that it's feasible. However, the impact of the implementation is still a question that opposition could focus on in debating whether or not, after all of these endangered animals are put outside of the zoos, will they be able to withstand the current living in the wild and whatnot. Those are valid reasons. However, we assume that happens after the policy is implemented and not whether or not the policy can be implemented. So that's the delineation in regards to this question in and of itself. And a further thing to say about in regards to this question also is that you also have to see whether or not that since opposition didn't really respond to government's case and didn't challenge the definition, you most likely will have to run with the definition the government needs to send. That's given that context, that's how the debate will run most likely if there's no added additional layer in regards to this question. Sorry, I got a bit late, but hope that it's clear. So on the fourth question, this is a very long question. So like this entire slide will be the question first. You are judging a very tight debate under the motion. This House celebrates the influence of TikTok towards the music industry. Side affirmative argues that TikTok deserves to be celebrated because it makes music promotion as accessible as possible. They further frame this point by elaborating that music, like all other forms of entertainment, exists solely to amuse and immerse human beings. Given that TikTok had allowed for this expansion of this function of music, it deserves to be celebrated as a win. Side negative brought an argument that explains how TikTok would lessen the creativity of artists and the quality of music in the long run. They expanded on this by stating that the existence of TikTok only makes artists focus on creating catchy tunes and flashy hooks for the purpose of it being sampled and played in TikTok to be viral. This creates less incentive for artists to evaluate all parts of their songs, and they would be satisfied if they were able to create a good 15 to 20 seconds as long as it would be enough to go viral. So assuming that this is the only exchange that exists in this debate and there's no other additional material, how should we as judge weigh this debate? So for us, it's a win for government or affirmative that won the exchange. So this is a scenario in a debate where you need to weigh a debate where the arguments do not necessarily clash, right? So why did we think that affirmative won the exchange? Because while we agree that opposition gave a strong attempt to explain why the quality of music will decrease, I think that it still falls under affirmative's framing because there were never really any attempt by opposition or by negative to counterframe the biggest framing that government has brought or affirmative has brought, which is that TikTok and music is basically an avenue of entertainment. Given that they've explained to us how principally or how strategically music has to be seen, it means that they have established the level of importance. So while opposition managed to explain to us that the quality of music will worsen over time, why is that something that is so important then, right? Because I think that the harm is taken for granted. There's no attempt to explain the importance of harm and the mechanization of harm. So given that government's frame still exists, it means that there's a concession in the debate that, okay, government never contested that there may be bad music, but bad music is still inherently music anyway. And given the fact that bad music still allows for, the expansion of this function of music as a way for us to get entertained, then what is something that's so wrong with that? Not only that, given that opposition has conceded that that government's very own mechanism that music sells because they say that artists will want to be viral and whatnot, that's a concession that most likely government's music will sell. And so the level of importance, so on the level of importance, government takes or affirmative takes the exchange on that metric over side opposition. So yeah, opposition just like establishing a counter framing of importance for them to win that. So on the very last question, this is also a long question. You are currently judging a debate under the motion. This House regrets the popularity of transmedia storytelling. Affirmative argues that it creates complacency for artists in the industry, which will create worse films and stories because the artists would be too busy to innovate because their movies are guaranteed to be success when they are part of the transmedia label. Side Negative responded by bringing two prongs of rebuttals. One, that the popularity is good because it allows for experimentation and innovation because it creates a loyal fan base, which would create a safety net. Second, they added to this response by saying that these artists are going to be canceled if they are complacent and they are going to make worse movies later on that certain net. So assuming that there are no other contribution, how should we weigh the response that's been thrown by negative to affirmative? So for us, we think that it's quite clear that opposition or negative takes the exchange. However, there's a few things for us to note. If we were to take a look at opposition's response or negative response, there's a slight possibility of tension in their response because the two main characterization they set of response to government was number one, the fans would be loyal, therefore there would be safety net. Second, the fans would cancel the creators if the movie is back. If you are looking at it holistically, it could be argued that both characterization of loyal and they would act as a safety net and canceling because they don't want the movies to be bad stabs each other. Given the fact that most of the time the safety net would not exist if the fans would want to cancel the artist later on, right? So I know that it's quite implicit, and I know that it may not be that clear to be seen as a contradiction, but there is a reason and push for you to see it as a contradiction in the end of the day, right? If this is the case, it is valid for the judge to think that opposition is contradictive given the lack of clarity in the speech of the speaker, because they never really explained to us if the second response was an even if response or not. If you really think that that's the case, dismiss the second characterization and take the first. But in the end of the day, even if you dismiss that second characterization, we from the CAP think that that first characterization is still enough to kick out government's harm because they succeed in recharacterizing and flipping off government's characterization as a benefit. One last thing to note is that, like what Sekar said before, opposition doesn't automatically win over government because they have more structural reason. I think that you cannot just say they have two structural reasons. Government doesn't only bring one structural reason or none at all. It means that opposition wins over government. That's not the case. That's one thing we have to note. So you have to see and weigh how does the two characterization and the two rebuttals weigh in the context of the debate. Are they both consistent? Are they well elaborated, or are they contradictory to each other? And then you have to explain to us the role of the structural reasons in the debate. Because like even if you were to credit the second response, you also need to explain what the role of the response is. Is it a worst case mitigation, or is it a negation against government's benefit? If you don't think that as a contradiction. Yeah, so that's all the 5 questions that you have on the short answers, and those are all the multiple choice questions that we have created from the judge test. Hopefully, this video will be able for you to help understand judging even more for this year's IVED. And yeah, that's from me and Sakar, and also from Elgard and Hans. So yeah, thank you for watching the video, everyone. Hopefully, it's clear and will be helpful for all of you. Thank you. Bye.